So Martin, what is your role exactly? Because I know you doing some work with it. Was it with the SMEs?
Yeah, well, originally my role started as advising the government on opening up procurement to small businesses. It was originally 2 days a week, but I can't remember many days in the last 6 months. I haven't done about 5 or 6, but there you go. So I'm advising right across government now on supporting small businesses, trying to get through this pandemic and recession and Brexit. So as you can imagine, it's far more reaching than when I first started.
Do you think they have a good grasp of what the typical SME is going through?
It varies. There's a lot of government departments do understand it, but there's an awful lot of people that wouldn't know their way out of the Westminster bubble.
Yeah, is that sort of your career politicians, I guess? Yeah.
You might say that. I couldn't possibly comment. It's in the civil service textbook. I've got all of these now.
You dealt with that very well, Martin. Just saying.
Yeah. I think after this period in government, I think I shall have to write my memoirs, you know. Problem is they'll put it in the fiction column.
You're spending too much time around politicians, Martin.
You're learning how not to answer a question, Martin.
That's right.
Absolutely right, Paul. It's an art form.
Okay, I'll kick things off. We're almost at 1:05 now, so I'm just going to mute everybody. Makes it easier in terms of any background noise. I have allowed participants to unmute yourselves, so if you do need to speak, you can just do that. So welcome everybody to the 5th of October, the 12th of October meeting of the Rotary Club of Leicester. Welcome to, we've got several guests I can see. Well, we've got Louise, who's been fresh from her induction last week, and that went very well, so it's good to have you here with us today. I can see Pam Spokes is with us today, so welcome as always, nice to have you on. Is there anybody I've missed? There's a couple of empty chairs. I think people have just gone to grab a cup of tea or something. Okay. Great. It's good to have a nice turnout again, as always. So, do we have any greetings from other clubs? You can just unmute yourself if you do need to speak.
Can I bring greetings from President Sarita and the members of the Rotary Club of Leicester Novus, and it's good to be with you again.
No, that's great. I wrote to her this morning. I mentioned well, I wrote to Sarita this morning whether she'd like to join us. Your club would like to join us for the Rotary for Food Banks initiative. So look forward to speaking to her about that. Any others? Okay. Any secretary's notices, Barry?
No.
Short and sweet, I like it. Okay, anything from anything to report from any committee chairman? No, okay. From my end, I'm just going to quickly share my screen to show you where we're at with our Rotary for Food Banks initiative. Okay, just give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Yep, so we've now, in terms of fundraising, we've had a very generous donation last week from a Rotarian. We're up to just under £3,000 now to help purchase food for food banks. That's essentially what we're doing here with a scheme called Rotary for Food Banks, who ultimately buy the food through Morrison's at hugely discounted prices and distribute the food to food banks. In our case, it will be local Leicester food banks. And these are the ones that we've now onboarded into this scheme. So the procedure is we identify a local food bank and we get them approved by Rotary for food banks, and they also need to submit a form, and we do the same. And once that's done, we get approval. So these 5 organisations have been approved. Midlands Langar Seva, they are involved in serving food in the city centre to around 110 individuals on a weekly basis from the market, and they serve hot food. They also have a need for volunteers, so I'm looking to do some work with them, getting some of our Rotarians and other volunteers out into the city centre to serve food. So if anybody's interested in doing something like that, please give me a shout. We have Age UK, Open Hands, some of you will remember, came and spoke. We had a lady called Bethany, she came and spoke to us. We have Help the Homeless. Many of you will remember Arif Viraji, very nice guy. I'm not sure if you all read the Mercury, but if you do, you'll have seen that last week they were given £10,500 by M&S. So I wrote to him and congratulated him, and I'm sure that will be put to good use. And we have another one called a Ganesh Pension Trust, which operate a food bank in, again, LE1. They support, I believe, primarily women who've been victims of domestic abuse and that sort of thing. So it's a very worthy cause, and I'm very pleased to have them on board. So that's the kind of places our money will be going towards and purchasing food directly for those sorts of organisations. On the volunteering side, we've been working very hard to get young people into a Rotaract group, which is going well. We've been engaging, we've had responses from DMU Local. DMU Local is De Montfort University's the side of DMU that deals with pairing students and staff with worthy local organisations involved in charitable work. And I've written to them and had a very positive response that they want to be involved, they want to promote what we're doing, and I'm speaking to them this week. And we also have Voluntary Action Leicester, very similar response, very keen to promote our initiative to their bank of, a very large bank of volunteers. So again, I'm talking to them and giving them sort of a bit more detail in terms of the kind of projects we have, and one of them will be this one, so the Midlands Langar, because that's the only one I feel will be very straightforward for us to get involved with, and they have a big need for volunteers, which some of the others don't. So that's essentially what we're doing, and it's a positive feedback loop, because as we get more volunteers doing more projects, we get more publicity because people are sharing on social media and talking about it. As we get more things being talked about, it'll help us with fundraising. On the fundraising side, Barry and I went through a list of around 100 different organisations, trusts, charities, places that potentially provide funding for what we're doing here, and we've shortlisted that down to about, I think it's about 10, and we're starting this week to make applications. And so the publicity makes the fundraising easy. As we get more funds, we can buy more food. As we buy more food, we can have more impact, get more volunteers, and it just keeps feeding on itself. So that's really what we're trying to do, and I'm trying to keep everything in balance, because we can't have too many food banks on board if we don't have enough money, because they won't get very meaningful donations. So we need to kind of scale things up as much as we can in a reasonable proportion to make things work. So that's the idea of it, and let's see how that turns out in practice. But so far it seems to be progressing okay. But please, if anybody wants to help in any way, give me a shout. Either call me or drop me an email. And at this point, I'd love to start getting as many Rotarians involved as I can. Even if you can't get involved yourself, but you know somebody else who might be useful for me to talk to, please let me know. Okay. We have a couple of chats. I'm just going to see if there's... Okay, yeah. So at this point, we have our speaker. We have Debbie with us, yeah. Okay, great. So I'm just going to introduce. So Debbie's going to talk to us. Debbie, oh, there, you're unmuted. Great. Good to have you. And Debbie Hodge is the chair of Rotary Olympic and the Rotary Olympic and Paralympic Committee, who's going to be talking to us about transforming lives through sport. So please take it away, Debbie.
Thank you. Good to be with you. First question, can I share my screen, please?
I will set you up so you can in about 2 seconds.
Lovely. While you're doing that, I'll just bring you greetings from my club, the Rotary Club of Ware, and our president, Dilip. And it's been quite interesting to hear about how you're involved with food banks, because being last year as immediate past president, I've been of Rotary in Great Britain and Ireland, been on the fringes of how that major project has been taking off, and it's really good to see. And in my local 2 places I do my Rotary, we have food bank collections every Saturday morning outside our local village shops, and we work with where my club is in Ware, our dinner money is all going to food banks. So we have some connections over food banks, which is great. But today I'm going to talk to you about transforming lives through sport, and my work that started with the Olympic and Paralympic Committee way back in 2010, and where it led me to. And it's quite an interesting journey, because as a Rotarian, you never know who you're going to meet, how you're going to make connections, and where it's all going to end up. And way back in 2010, I was district governor nominee for my district, Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire and Buckinghamshire. And we were thinking about Olympics and Paralympics because we're not that far from London. And we had one of the venues in our patch, the whitewater rafting course. And we thought, well, we probably ought to do something. So I mentioned it at a training meeting for the governors for 2012-13. And some bright spark at Rotary in Britain and Ireland said, oh, well, that's a really good idea, Debbie. Can you form a committee? Now, that's true Rotary style. If there's a good idea, form a committee. Nowadays, if there's a good idea, we have a WhatsApp meeting and we just get on with it. But back in 2010, we had a committee. The committee was made up of district governors, nominees and elects from the regions around Great Britain and Ireland that had an Olympic or Paralympic venue. So we had everything from Weymouth to Southend to Oxfordshire to Hertfordshire and of course London. And it proved to be very worthwhile because it allowed Rotary clubs in those areas to share ideas about how they would engage with the Olympics and Paralympics. It gave us a platform to champion the work that Rotary does with young people, and our youth competitions for that year, young photographer and young writer, received the Inspired By mark for 2012. And the theme was, of course, Olympics or Olympic values. And that created quite a buzz. One of the projects I led was a thing called Work for Purpose, which worked on in the Olympic Village. Over 2 weeks, we had over 250 volunteers who came and worked with the housekeeping and hospitality team. And instead of taking our wages, that went direct to nominated Rotary projects. We worked with some of our project partners so that Chicken Shed, the all-inclusive theatre in North London, actually set up a bursary for 2 degree places out of the money their volunteers worked, and we doubled that up with a Rotary grant. That whole journey was amazing, but one of the people I met along the journey was a guy called Mcelhatton. Now, Mcelhatton was a British Airways apprentice 35 years ago, going to work one day on his bicycle. He got run over by a lorry twice and ended up in a wheelchair. And he worked his way through, was a Paralympian, played basketball for Great Britain, but ended up being the CEO of an organisation called Willpower, which is the charity for British wheelchair sport. And he came and met the assembled team and introduced us to, gave us much more insight into the Paralympics and shared some of the stories from his workplace, Stoke Mandeville Stadium. Many people will have heard of Stoke Mandeville Stadium as the birthplace of the Paralympics through the work of a German refugee called Ludwig Gutmann, who transformed the lives of soldiers being sent to what was then the spinal unit with basically paralysis, anything from the neck down, as a result of injury during the war. And they came to Stoke Mandeville in a wooden box lined with sand, because that was the safest way to transport them. He thought coffins were really not a good idea for people who were alive. So he changed that to stroke, and then sought to give these people hope and an opportunity to transform their lives through sport. And the very first games was at Stoke Mandeville on the lawn in between the hospital and what is now the sports centre. And it was an archery competition. And that archery competition was the beginning of Rotary's involvement with Stoke Mandeville, because the Rotary Club of Aylesbury ran the very important part of that day. They ran the beer tent, which was crucial, absolutely crucial. And Rotary's involvement has continued and still continues today. So Martin came and told us all these stories, and he asked us to go and visit him. Come up and see what we're doing. And pre-COVID, every spring and every autumn, we have some specific national events. In the spring, it's the Interspinal Unit Games. In the autumn, it's the Junior Games. Well, we were visiting in the autumn, so we went to the Junior Games, and we all had opportunities to get involved with different bits of sport that disabled young people were doing. Quite a few of the team thought they'd try basketball. Now, my boys played basketball at a very senior level. Stephen played for Great Britain under 14s. And my husband said, well, I'll have a go at that. That can't be that bad. I've played with the boys. He found it impossible to shoot a basket from sitting down. He really learned just how difficult it was. And I thought, well, there's no way I can do that. My hand-eye coordination and getting wheels and driving wouldn't work. So I pottered off and went and looked at archery. And I met a young lady called Harriet. And Harriet was doing her bit, demonstrating how anybody can get into archery. Harriet had got a left-sided weakness. She had a patch over her left eye and sat in a modified chair. I watched her as she kept hitting the ball. And I thought, it's remarkable what young people can do. And then Fred came over. Now, Fred's a trainer for the archery team, and he wears a leather Stetson. I don't know why, but he wears it all the time. And he came over and he said, oh, hi, you're Debbie, aren't you? I said, yes. He said, yeah, you've got a name badge on. I'm thinking, oh, okay. But I'd also got a Rotary badge on. He said, oh, you're from Rotary? Yeah. I said, there's quite a few of us here today. I said, the others are playing basketball, but I sort of thought, no, I'll come and see what else is happening. And we were just chatting away. And I said, this young lady is very good. Oh, this is Harriet. Yeah, she is. She's probably a tip to join the GB squad. Whoops, sorry. And so Harriet turned as she heard her name and said, well, do you want to go? I said, oh, I can't do that. And she just looked at me and she said, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Well, you don't turn a 13-year-old down who says that to you. So I had a go. She was very gracious. I did hit the target, but I learned that her life had been transformed twice in the last few years prior to me meeting her. The first time was when she was struck down by a mystery virus illness that left her with a left-sided weakness, problems with her eye, poor balance, and low energy. The second transformation came when her local physiotherapist said, go down to Stoke Mandeville and have a go at something. And she found archery, and it transformed her life completely. And as I got to know her and her mum echoed all that. She said, we had a bright, sparky, normal child who then was ill and became very self-centered, she didn't use the word depressed, but wouldn't go out, wouldn't engage with anything. I'm rubbish, can't do anything. We eventually came down to Stoke Mandeville. She tried basketball and it wasn't for her because she couldn't keep up, but she found archery. And since then, she's now got a whole new group of friends. She's got something to talk about, and she's got something she can do that most of us can't. And that's really important, to find the one thing that you can be really good at. So Harriet reeled me into the world of Willpower, and I then became an ambassador for them, and now I sit on the board. And the board work is fascinating. I've been to numerous receptions at the House of Lords. I've had tea with David Weir, who's the guy in the red helmet, number 20 at the London 2012 Marathon. I've been to presentations with Tanny Gray-Thompson. The Duchess of Sussex is a regular at Stoke Mandeville. All these wonderful things that are part and parcel of promoting wheelchair sport. But on the other side of that is the day-to-day work we do. And that involves making sure that Willpower's name is known for what it does, because we are the National Disability Sports Organisation for wheelchair sport. We have many sports that come under our umbrella. Wheelchair racing is one, but basketball, rugby, wheelchair weightlifting, the archery, some of those things all come under our big umbrella. And we are the owners of Stoke Mandeville Stadium, which, as you can imagine, is a huge responsibility. But we are the birthplace of the Paralympic movement. And in 2012, we were the place where the Paralympic flame lighting ceremony took place before the Paralympic torch was then taken down to London for the 2012 Paralympics. That started something quite magical, because there'd never really been a proper torchlight process for the Paralympics. Well, having worked very hard in 2012 and really put Stoke Mandeville on the map as the home and the birthplace of the Paralympic movement, we now are the centre for the heritage flame lighting for every Games going forward. And you can see we did Sochi in 2014, Rio in 16, and we would have been doing Tokyo this year, except we're going to have to do it next year, we hope. And that allows us again to retell the story of the Paralympic movement. And our mission is very simple. It's to transform lives through sport. And it's what we do. We provide opportunities for disabled people to participate in sport at either a recreational level or at a competitive level. Now, you've got two competitors here, one of our archers and a wheelchair rugby player. The wheelchair rugby is fascinating, it's hard hitting, it's exciting, and they're the only team that have a welder on their squad because they damage their chairs quite significantly. And one of the ways Rotary got involved in 2012-13 was through the wheel appeal. And in that appeal, we raised £100,000 that was then distributed back to districts where they could nominate disabled people for a sports wheelchair. Because a sports wheelchair costs anything from about £4,000 to about £40,000, depending on your sport and depending on just how much damage you might do to it. But that meant that Rotary could transform lives through sport and that was part of our Olympic legacy. But we aim to make sure that those participation events can happen across the country. If we can. We were just beginning last autumn, this spring, to move some of our activities to other centres, to start making some of those links, and then COVID hit. And that's put a real spanner in the works, a spoke in the wheels, if you like, because it has curtailed our activity significantly. And while we are still working on inclusive facilities at Stoke Mandeville, and in fact there was, I caught a bit of an old DIY SOS the other day, and they were doing it for a returning soldier who'd lost a limb. And he said, well, you go to the gym and they're not adapted to enable people with certain disabilities to use them. And I thought, well, if you come down to Stoke Mandeville, whether you've got whatever bit doesn't work, there is a piece of machinery that you can work with. So we have machines that you can put your wheelchair in. Instead of sitting on a bench, you can take the bench out, slide your wheelchair in, still do all your weightlifting and everything else. And that inclusiveness is something that we're quite passionate about, because we believe that every person has the right to a full life. And for us, that full life includes exercise and or sport at a level that you're comfortable with. One of our aims, of course, going forward is to make sure we're a credible and robust organisation. That's taxing us greatly at the moment. As you can imagine, as along with every other charity, we're having to rethink our entire fundraising strategy. A lot of our major events, say the Spinal Unit Games and the Junior Games, are sponsored by big corporates. Well, big corporates are looking at how they're going to do that in the future. A lot of our local community fundraising is with schools. You imagine trying to take some of our work into schools at the moment, that's not going to happen. So we are thinking outside the box. We had 8 people running the virtual London Marathon the other weekend. It didn't raise as much as it normally does, but people are out there doing their bit. So that was important. And part of my role now is actually supporting the staff of Willpower. We have a staff, every spinal injury unit in Great Britain and Ireland has a Willpower sports advisor. So we have 12 of those. We have key sports leaders in the office, as well as the usual accountants, fundraisers, and all the rest of it. And supporting that group of people takes a fair bit of time, because our sports advisors have been furloughed since the beginning. And how that will work out post the end of the month, we don't know. So there is some challenges ahead. But as you can see on the face of that young woman on a hand cycle, life is for living. And if you ever get the chance to go in a hand cycle, take it, because you're very low to the ground. They're very easy to make go very fast. And the feeling of exhilaration is just as it is on her face. But part of our work, besides getting people involved in sport, is to raise awareness. And one of the ways we do that is to run wheelchair relays. And we've been running a wheelchair relay with the Rotarians around North Herts and South Bedfordshire at Bedfordshire Athletics Track for 5 years. And all sorts of people came and took part. We had corporates putting in teams to do the 200 metre for 14 members, 50 metres each. Hilarious. You try sitting in a wheelchair and make it go at a pace in one direction. It's almost impossible, because we're all right or left hand dominant. So we have more power in one side of our body or the other. You know what happens then? You end up going round in circles. But it was great fun. And over time, we raised sufficient money to facilitate the start of a wheelchair racing club at Bedford Athletics. So Rotary working with Willpower have made that happen. Where we go with that in the future, we're not sure, because of course mass participation is not on the cards at the moment, but we hope to get some of that back. But I want to leave you with this picture. These two young guys in the red polo shirts have just finished a game of boccia. Boccia is that wonderful sport that anybody can play, where you have a white jack, a bit like bowls, and you have soft leather balls to aim at the jack. And literally any ability can do this. Even if you have just a push of your hand, you can use a ramp to send the ball down onto the course. And these guys had just finished and they'd won. And the young fella in the middle is texting his mum to say we won. But it epitomizes the enthusiasm and the enjoyment that young people and not so young can get out of sport, and how it gives them something that they can be proud of, that they can involve themselves with. And I'll leave you with one other story. I met a young man called Jack. Jack wasn't in a wheelchair, hadn't had a spinal injury. He'd come to meet his dad at the spinal injury games. And I saw him at the beginning of the week, and he was feeling a bit not quite right, don't know what I'm doing here. He'd been to see Dad a few times in the spinal injury unit, but wasn't finding it very easy. Dad had fallen off a ladder, clearing out the gutters. An innocuous fall, one might think, but he broke his back. Towards the end of the week, I met Jack and his dad again, and I said, "How's it going?" And his dad smiled, and Jack said, "It's okay." And I said, "Just okay?" He said, "Well, no, I think we'll be all right." Jack wandered off, and I said to his dad, "What was all that about? What do you mean you'll think it'll be all right?" He says, "I think we've found a new sport. We used to play football. I think we're now going to be taking up table tennis. The problem is he doesn't want to talk about it at the moment because I beat him." So Dad in a wheelchair beat his teenage son, but it reignited the bond that they had over sport. And that's the way sport can transform lives. And it's been my pleasure to be part of that journey for the last 10 years. I've probably got 3 more years as a trustee, and then we'll see what happens after that. But the values of Willpower and the values of Rotary are very similar. We transform lives in all sorts of ways. Willpower transforms lives through sport. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie. Very good, very good. Just one question before we go and open it up to our members. How are your sportsmen and women keeping up with their sort of training regimes, given that the gyms are closed or they're very restricted, and maybe some of the players might be having other kind of issues that might make them more vulnerable to things like COVID?
It is a problem because of their shielding arrangements, but one of the projects we've been running is a project called Elastic Bands. And elastic bands are exercise bands. If anyone's had a broken leg or a shoulder physiotherapy, they may have used one of these, and they allow you to do resistance work safely. And we've been getting people to donate £50, and for that we give a set of elastic bands to one of our disabled members, and a set also then goes to the polio fellowship, and they give it to one of the post-polio survivors. Because now they're finding that they're having problems with mobility, and so we're supporting them as well. Other people, the wheelchair racers are just doing, laps of the local park, or Hannah Cockcroft is still up on the hills doing her stuff. And you can see from the London Marathon that the senior wheelchair racers are just getting on with it. What is more debilitating is some of our sort of cerebral palsy members and those kind of people, because they have multiple problems, and it really does make it difficult for them. but they're also one of the group of people that are gaining from some of our online yoga exercising. We run a cafe, I think that's on a Thursday now, so that people can join in some exercise stuff, but it is a challenge.
Okay. Do we have any questions from members? And if you do, please unmute yourself first, or put your hand up so I can see you.
Oh, good.
Looks like you did a fantastic job there. You've answered everybody's questions. So, well, what are your kind of goals for this year then? This year for the next 12 months? I mean, do you have any? Is it going to remain flexible?
It has to remain flexible, because we have a community gym in the centre. Yeah, it's a standard community centre, although hugely adaptive. So we are now having people in the gym, and we've started swimming again. So we have some income coming in to our management company that run the centre as a commercial enterprise. Whether that will keep them above water and then give us our payment, we don't know yet. And with the announcements potentially this afternoon, anything could happen. If suddenly Buckinghamshire's into tier 3, that'll all be closed. So we are being flexible. We did have the opportunity to use some of our, we have a hotel on site, small, and that was used for rehabilitative patients who were in the rehabilitative stage post-surgery, so that freed up COVID beds in the hospital. But we have to remain flexible, and we have to maintain some kind of presence, and that's a key thing that we're doing at the moment. So we have got some good stories coming out about how the elastic bands are being used. We've got some good stories now about the London Marathon and people involved with that. But it is being more agile and more adaptive, and not getting stuck because we've always done it this way. And that's a challenge to some of our more senior board members, because they are not in places where they've had to adapt for a long time.
Yeah, you put that very politely.
But it's the same with Rotary.
It's the same in lots of places, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yes, very.
But I do have my fingers crossed for you, and I do wish you all the best. It's a wonderful course.
Thank you.
So well done for your hard work. Okay, so if Richard is around and doesn't mind, I think it'd be really nice to hear from him in terms of the current state of play locally, in terms of what's going on with COVID.
As you know, I've been away for the last 3 weeks. I actually had 2 weeks of relatively COVID-free existence, walking the West Highland Way and then in a camper van in the Outer Hebrides, and it was a delight. But anyway, back to reality. It's interesting because, as you know, Leicester was the sort of leading edge of wave 2 of this, and has been apparently awash with COVID since, well, I don't know since how long really. But as I sort of rather suggested when I last spoke to you 4 weeks ago, I was quite hopeful that this was not going to translate into the hospital. And indeed, that's more or less the case. As it was last week, we had just over 40 patients in hospital. So to put that into perspective, that's about between 2 and 3% of our total bed base, of which a handful were in ITU. And in the last 4 weeks, there have been 10 people who have sadly died with COVID. To put that into perspective, at the height of the first wave, we were having about 60 a week. So that's it. It's not in any shape or form anywhere near like it was in the first wave. And there've been some interesting changes in the way we manage the people who are admitted. You'll be aware that at the outset of the pandemic, ventilators were the thing, and the government spent squillions on buying Formula One ventilators, etc. Realistically, they aren't actually the thing at all. because the problem is that unless you can actually survive 2 weeks on a ventilator in ICU, then it's no good. And bearing in mind that the vast majority of people who develop COVID pneumonia won't survive 2 weeks on a ventilation in ICU simply because their physiology is not up to it. And so basically, I had a very good discussion with one of our main COVID consultants on Friday. And when patients come in, if they have a new oxygen requirement, then they get treated with dexamethasone, which I'm quite sure you're aware that the great orange man had, which is effective if you've got a new oxygen requirement. If you haven't got a new oxygen requirement, dexamethasone actually makes it worse. So it's a fairly fine decision to make. Cpap is the other thing you will remember. That's continuous positive airways pressure. You'll remember that was all the rage as well about 2 or 3 months ago. Well, that's a waste of time now. So that's been ditched largely, not completely, but largely. So decisions have to be made fairly early on. If you're one of the fairly small proportion of patients who are young, who develop COVID pneumonitis, then they make a decision early to go to ICU, because the sooner you get there, the better. If you're not, then it's dexamethasone, and hope and really see how it goes. But that's really about the limits of the management now. But I think it's just interesting, because what we don't know is whether all the various lockdowns that are happening and have happened in Leicester have made any difference at all, because the number of people actually testing positive hasn't really changed a great deal in Leicester over the last few weeks, and whether you could get argued either way. You could say, well, it would have been a lot more if we hadn't had lockdown, or you could say lockdown hasn't actually made any difference, and we simply don't know. But you'll be aware that our neighbours up just a bit further up the trend are doing not so well at the moment. I think I think this will turn out how it will be nationally. I think the second wave, as it's called, will be an awful lot of people catching COVID or testing positive, but the number actually getting ill and dying will be far, far less than it was in wave one. And I think that's because we're protecting those vulnerable a bit better. And also, dare I say it, the people who were prone to die from COVID pneumonia have probably already done so. And you may only live twice, but you only die once. And so, I mean, I know it's a bald reality, but that's the facts. So I think we can be hopeful, but what concerns me far more is the ongoing damage caused by all these lockdowns and everything, because I think that is causing huge problems with mental health and the economy and all other aspects of the NHS still aren't functioning properly. And so I think it really does need to be a reality check on the part of the politicians at some stage, but that's not for me to say. So there we go.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Do we have any questions for Richard? I'm sure we'll have one or two. Yes, Ibrahim. Just unmute yourself, please, mate.
Hi, Richard.
Yeah.
I just read a couple of reports that came out of Germany from health providers. And one of the things that they're saying that caught my attention is that they feel that the virus has weakened to a large extent.
Yeah, well, that's what happens with all viruses. It's a combination. It's not only the virus, and we've seen this with pandemics in the past, and the Russian one was a classic example. It comes back over about 3 years, and each time it comes back, it gets less virulent, but also you do get changes in the immunity of the population. Yeah. I mean, we all go on about antibodies and T cells, but there's so much about natural immunity that simply we don't have any idea about. Because why is it you can put 4 people in a room and you expose them to exactly the same amount of virus, and one person gets ill and the other 3 don't? I mean, how do we just don't know is the answer. We only know the things we know. We don't know that in the words of whoever it was, the American vice president, it's the unknown unknowns that we haven't got a clue about. I think that is certainly one element of it. I think there's a natural immunity within the population, herd immunity, whatever you want to call it. because herd immunity just refers to people who are either immune or not. What we don't know is that the subtle variations of that. You can have a generic immunity, which isn't necessarily the same as a specific immunity.
We don't know whether it's the immunity of the people or the virus has weakened, and which.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's probably a combination of both. Is the answer to that?
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Martin.
Just curious at Richard's view on how quickly Donald Trump allegedly recovered from it, because they've obviously tested a lot of medicine on him.
Yeah, well, of course, the thing is, he probably, he tested positive for COVID-19, and that's a whole shed load different to having COVID pneumonia. You've got to remember that there are two aspects of this. So people who test positive and get COVID, as I did 6 months ago, and were barely ill. I mean, I had a bit of a tight chest for a couple of weeks, and that was about it. Or the people who develop full-blown COVID pneumonia. And there's no doubt, and clearly Boris did get COVID pneumonitis, and there's no doubt about that. Whereas I don't think there's really any evidence that Donald Trump was ever actually properly ill. I mean, who knows, because we had so many different things coming out of it. But it didn't look to me as if whereas Boris looked bloody ill for days and days before he went into hospital, whereas Donald just looks orange as usual. And so I think that was just the whole thing was just a bit of a, he tested positive for COVID-19, but I don't think he was actually ever that ill. And I think they just gave him the entire armamentarium just so you could say he'd had it. I don't think he had domestos though. I think he was. They drew the line at that one.
I thought it was Dettol.
Oh, Dettol was actually something pretty evil anyway.
Okay, thank you. Should we continue with our usual precautions, do you think, or is there anything new that we should be doing?
I'm going to refrain from comment on that, because my personal view is I think social distancing is society's destruction. I really do. I just think we've got to man up to this and just get on with life, because it is catastrophic, social distancing. It is horribly divisive right throughout society. And the longer it goes on, the worse it's going to get. So I just think we've just got to man up and get on and protect those who need protecting, and everybody else just gets on with their lives, because otherwise we're just going to be stuck with this. Because we're not going to have a vaccine. I mean, it may be wrong, but I'd be very surprised if we have an effective vaccine within the next 12 months. And the virus will come and go for maybe another 1, 2, 3 years. Who knows? I mean, I don't know. We can't just go on like this. We really can't.
Yes, Nick.
Just a quick one, really. I've heard that phrase an awful lot lately. This business of just get on with it and protect those who need protecting.
Yeah.
But who's going to do that protecting of those people? Because I mean, the classic was in the care homes where we have all sorts of people coming and going from a care home, and you're never going to know actually whether they have picked up COVID or not, are you? Well, the same could be said of anybody else who needs protection.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. But bear in mind that in the first wave, our ability to test people was woeful. I mean, even if you got a test, it took forever to get a result back. Whereas things are much better now. So you can do almost real-time testing of the people caring. So it's never going to be 100%, but it can be an awful lot better than it was. And bear in mind, I think it's a bit arrogant of us to suggest that everybody who's elderly wants to spend the rest of their lives in solitary confinement. People may say, actually, well, I've actually had a fairly good life, and if I catch COVID, well, that's that. But I actually want to enjoy the last, whatever I have left on this planet. But we have this sort of dictatorial approach that just because you're over 70, you're stuffed. That's it, solitary confinement to keep you as alive as long as possible. And okay, if that's the life you want to live, that's fine. But I don't think it should be forced on people.
I'll say
Richard, you might need to put your head under a pillow at 3:30.
I hate to think what's going to come out. I just don't know. But at least we're not. I'm in Melton, you see. In Melton, we're absolutely pristine healthy out here. You know, I think it's about 5 cases per million or something. I don't know what it is.
You better man the barricades.
Yeah, well, my partner lives just in Nottinghamshire, unfortunately, so we have a bit of an issue.
You're lucky, Richard. I'm living in Liverpool. Well, apparently,
you're
the worst in the world.
You're completely stuffed, Paul. You made a tactical error going up there.
Absolutely right. Well, I brought it with me from Leicester.
That's it. You're COVID Mary, you see.
Parminder, you need to unmute yourself.
Is somebody trying to talk? Sorry.
Sorry, that's me. I haven't unmuted I've been telling everybody else to unmute themselves, and I haven't done it myself. So yes, please unmute yourselves. We're now going to say goodbye. Next week we have Marcus Ash, Director of Pragnell. They're I guess they're the jewelry operators, aren't they? So he's going to be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on retail in 2020 and beyond. So I'm sure that'll be fascinating. And at this point, thank you everybody for joining. We've got 21 participants now. I think we reached about 24, I saw earlier on, so great turnout. And thanks everybody for joining. I'll see you all next week, and this meeting stands adjourned. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.